All right, well, welcome everyone to the FME and Transportation. This is our March meeting, last meeting before GIST. So hope to see everyone there. Before we get started, just want to give a few quick reminders. We are actively looking for suggestions for topics that would benefit you and the GIST community. So if anyone has any, please let us know. We're open for anything. And if you're ever interested in presenting, no matter how basic or complex, please reach out. We're more than happy to have you guys show off all the work that you're doing. Additionally, if you guys have any feedback for areas of improvement within the special interest group, just let us know. And just another reminder, GIST is April 2nd to 5th in Atlanta. So we hope to see everyone there. We are going to be having a SIG meeting on April 4th at 5:30. And I know there'll be more details to come as we get a little bit closer to the date. So to go today's agenda, we will, we're welcoming everyone right now. Oh, of course, it didn't update on here. We're going to skip over the GIST SIG format. We're going to put that at the end, as you see on number 7. But we're going to introduce Dave. Dave from FME will be doing our presentation today for bulk processing in FME. There'll be a live Q&A session afterwards. We'll wrap up and then we'll go over the SIG format that we're going to have in Atlanta next month. So to introduce Dave, an FME user since 1997. He's an applications expert at Safe Software. He's responsible for assisting strategic clients and partners. Before joining Safe 16, maybe 17 years ago now, Dave worked as a GIS manager for an aerial mapping firm. His favorite FME transformer is the topology builder, and his least favorite food is pickles, which I highly disagree with. So today, Dave's going to be going over bulk processing and FME. And from here, Dave, I will let you take over for you to share your presentation.
Okay, let me just give me a second. I'll try sharing my screen here. Okay, good. And desktop 1. That's done. Okay, let me move this over. There we go. So everyone can see a big little FME logo and some big orange letters. Cool.
Yes, looks good here.
Awesome. So today I'm going to talk about bulk mode processing in FME. And this is a little bit different than the sort of things we usually talk about because it is something that is happening underneath the covers that you really don't have much control over. But it is something we've been bringing in for a while, and it's not fully implemented, but it's mostly implemented in FME. So what is bulk mode processing? Oops. Okay, we have to sort of explain this. We have to go back to the original design of FME. FME started off as essentially a translator to translate from this BC government's SAIF format, hence the Safe Software name, to various CAD and GIS formats. Now, SAIF was kind of like a proto-GML in that it didn't have a schema. It was very unstructured. It could hold anything. CAD data is kind of the same way. I mean, the CAD data doesn't really have user attributes, but it's got a whole bunch of format attributes like symbology and stuff that can be different for different types of geometries. So so we had to sort of build our data structure to handle all this sort of unformatted, unstructured data. And we did that, and it's very flexible. Unfortunately, it does have a very large amount of overhead to it. So when we started working with point clouds back in, I believe, 2011, we kind of needed a new data structure because now we're dealing with like millions and millions of points, and our old structure was just not up to the job. So we created a more efficient data structure to deal with basically data with schema. So it's a very sort of regimented type of data. It's not very flexible. It's got a certain amount of attributes. It's got a certain type of geometry. It's very rigid. And because of that, we could make all sorts of efficiencies. So this point cloud structure, we started thinking about it going, hey, maybe we start applying this to like data that normally we would read unstructured. And this sort of came about, we gained a big client who tossed some other software over for us. And they started complaining that our CSV reading was really slow compared to the old software. Now, this wasn't very good. We wanted to speed this up as much as possible. So we sort of took our point cloud structure and extended it to handle other data. Now, CSV has a schema. It's very structured. And we started moving it into this sort of new data structure, our bulk mode structure, if you will. And it became incredibly faster, and our big client was happy again. So over the years, we've started upgrading readers and writers and transformers to handle this new mode of data to get as much performance as possible. So this is basically we're showing now that we've got it, mostly implemented in FME, we have we're seeing a lot of performance improvements. So things like filters, 60% less time, anything with string, 25% less time. So basically all our transformers are showing quite a lot of improvement across the board. Data sets like readers and writers are crazy faster than they used to be. Like I'll show you that in a demo coming up, but basically if we're reading schema, we can, depending on the reader, but something like simple like CSV has gotten 100, 200 times faster. It's just crazy. So this is what we're sort of moving under hood to do as much in this bulk mode processing as possible. Now, there are still some features that, or some data formats that when you come in will not really be in this bulk mode. CAD is one of them because it is very different. The different types of features. It doesn't really lend itself to schema, but a lot of our stuff is database, and database really lends itself to this bulk mode. So these are some of the transformers that we're converting over to handle bulk mode. Now, the transformers that don't handle bulk mode still will handle the data. They just need to break it up before they handle the data and send it on. We're improving our transformers to sort of handle bulk mode in-house, so to speak, so they don't have to break it up to work on things. And so it's bulk mode in, bulk mode out, and everything stays fast along the pipeline. This just shows you over the years. I mean, we started with 3 transformers that can handle bulk mode, and this is a bit out of date. We're up to 340, probably more now for 2024. So just a few tricks and tips and tricks that you can use to sort of interact with the bulk mode and switch over from bulk mode to non-bulk mode. So how to create bulk features? The attribute keeper is probably the easiest one to use, and I'll show you that in the demo later. And that is because an attribute keeper, by its nature, essentially enforces schema on schemaless features. You're saying keep these attributes, so you know that it's got a minimum. It's going to have these attributes. It's certainly not going to have any more attributes, and that's what's, once you go through the attribute keeper, it's really easy to fit that data into a table. So that's kind of our gateway to the bulk mode if it's not already in bulk mode. Feature joiner, that's another one. That's a database join. So if we're working with sort of database data, again, we have schema, we can go to bulk mode. Now it says how to test for bulk features. Again, I'll show you this in the demo. If you see the numbers, if you've got the numbers turned on of the features going from transformer to transformer, if they go individually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not bulk mode. If you go in groups of 100,000, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, those are the bulk mode. And what we've done is we've created essentially tables of features of maximum 100,000 features, and we're sending that sort of table is internally to FME the feature. So that's why it goes up by 100,000. Now, to get out of bulk mode, if there's something you're doing that you don't want it in bulk mode, you can use the decelerator transformer. Normally, the decelerator was used to slow down your workspace. Say if you're hitting a website that gets upset, if you hammer it too often, an hour. But a decelerator with 0 doesn't actually delay the features at all. It doesn't slow them down. It just breaks up the bulk mode and sends off the features individually. So demos, let's sort of show you the bulk mode in action here. Okay, so this is a very simple workspace. We're reading a CSV file, I think 4 million odd records. We're just running it through a tester, and we're going to test it to see if a value is above or below a certain number. So just something really basic. I've got the decelerator in here, and so I want to start off with, let's see what happens when it's not in bulk mode. So the CSV reader will read in bulk mode by default. I've got the decelerators, just sort of decelerate it and split it up into individual records. So you see the records here, they're all going up by, well, it's going up a little fast to see one by one, but essentially it's going one by one. It's going through the tester, it's going out one by one as well. We'll let that run for a bit. Hey, 400,000 features, what did it take? 17 seconds. Cool. So let's go back to the native bulk mode and see how fast it runs in the bulk mode. Okay, so we went from 17 seconds to 1.7 seconds. That's quite an improvement in speed. So that shows you sort of and that's showing if you're reading from in the bulk mode, that if you get a sort of bulk mode pipeline from start to finish, you can go very, very fast. I'm going to do something a little bit different. Now this, I'm coming in from AutoCAD. Now AutoCAD data, I'm just going to actually start this up because it takes a bit to run.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So in the bulk mode in the previous workspace,
Yep.
the bulk mode usually essentially saying you're reading a chunk rather than individual records at a time, right? So where do we specify how large the chunk is, if that's something exposed or if that actually is meaningful for us to control?
That is something that's not under your control. Essentially, we picked a number that was useful to us. Again, the bulk mode is kind of an under the hood sort of thing. So 100,000 records is kind of what we determined was the optimum size.
So which is different from, let's say in the transaction, let's say database transaction, typically set 1,000 as a batch. So bulk, the term bulk and the term batch, and certainly the individual. So these are intertwined, related, but or in opposite. How do you, could you explain that a little bit?
Well, bulk. Okay, bulk mode, I mean, again, this is internal to FME. So bulk mode is essentially, this is the new data structure we have. It corresponds somewhat to the concept of, you know, batch uploading to databases and stuff. Since in databases you've got you know, you're communicating to them over the network. So sending individual features is not that efficient over network. You want to send big chunks. Now, the chunks you send, that's under your control because it depends on what database you're talking to. It depends on your network. And if you want to do a lot of testing, you can probably find a sweet spot that you get the optimum throughput with a certain batch size, if you will. But that's dependent on your network and your database. In bulk mode, an FME is completely dependent on FME. So we've decided what works best for us, and we're basically sticking to it. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Thanks. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we see we run it into individual mode here. I threw in an attribute keeper, not to change things into bulk mode, but simply to get rid of all the excess attributes that come in from CAD. So I'm trying to make the playing field as level as possible here. So we're dealing with both sets. We're dealing with the same size of data because I've gotten rid of all the attributes, which is all, it's only the geometry is left. It's only all the symbology is gone. Now in this attribute keeper, under advanced, I've set the feature output to bulk mode. Whereas in this one, under advanced, we have the feature output to individual mode. So that sort of controls the settings here. Otherwise, everything is exactly the same, doing certain tests. So this ran in 39.3 seconds. Let's try the bottom one. And we'll run that. That was a good time for another question, if anyone's got one. But yeah, so the thing here is that we are reading from a non-bulk bulk mode reader. So we're basically reading the unstructured data and we're stuffing it into bulk mode. So we're not going to see the performance improvements we saw when we're actually reading from bulk mode. But you'll notice that the numbers are going up one by one, whereas the numbers here are going up in 100,000s. The attribute keeper is basically getting a bunch of things, getting a bunch of records together, spitting out bulk mode record. Okay, so 38.3 versus what 41 before. So there is some improvement, but not a huge improvement. And that is because we are not reading. So the reader and writers in bulk mode will probably have the most effect. The transformers, once we get in, not as effective, but it depends on how many transformers you have or how many, we have a simple tester. So the more transformers you have, the more improvement you're going to get with bulk mode. And the attribute keeper is basically your gatekeeper, your doorway to the bulk mode. Just on a general note, if you're reading CAD data anyway, attribute keeper should be the first transformer it hits. Because here you can go in and you can keep only the attributes that you want, because CAD data comes in with a lot of symbology and format attributes. And even though they're not exposed under this format attribute setting, they're still there. So I would recommend exposing the ones you want, using an attribute keeper to keep only them, and just pare down those CAD features. That was a little demo. Is there any questions about those demos?
So, Dave, so in this case, attribute keeper and attribute remover, you couldn't just use one or the other. And of course, in just selecting some things, attribute keeper will allow this reformation of its internal data structure that's conducive for this batch mode, I suppose.
Yeah.
Attribute remover is retaining original data structure by removing some of attribute, by taking out attribute, which in that case will not help in terms of bulk mode operation. Am I right?
Yeah, the attribute remover removes attributes are there. The attribute keeper, again, it's essentially it's forcing your data into a fixed schema. Because only the attributes that are kept are the columns in your schema. So it's a really good candidate for, like I said, the gatekeeper to bulk mode.
Thanks.
Dave, going off of that, I know here when we're having people explore FME and do their own tests, instead of using an attribute keeper or the attribute remover, a lot of times we see people end up using an attribute manager just because there's so much versatility with it that they end up using that. What would you say for probably staying away from the attribute manager, or if the difference in speed is null at that point? What's your recommendation?
The attribute manager, I'm of two minds on the attribute manager. I understand the desire to have all of your to sort of cut. I mean, we've got almost 500. Yeah, we've got 540 transformers. That's a lot, and it's hard to remember them all. So it makes sense to sort of combine transformers where you can. So the attribute manager is a combination of the attribute remover, the attribute creator, the attribute renamer. But all of all of those tools are designed to work with the attributes you know, or the attributes that are exposed. And that's the thing, is that, especially with CAD data, very much especially with CAD data, these are all the possible attributes you can have on the data, and there's probably a few we've missed. But they're not on all the pieces of data, and if they're not turned on here, we don't expose them to the workspace, because there's several hundred of them, and that would be kind of a pain in the butt to have to, find your list of attributes, and you got to go to 200 to pick just the one you want. So they're essentially hidden in a way for just to keep the workspace a bit cleaner and easier to use, but they are still on the feature, right? So these attributes that are hidden essentially are not exposed, cannot be manipulated with the attribute manager, because they cannot be manipulated with the attribute creator or the attribute renamer, because the workspace doesn't know about them. The attribute keeper works the completely opposite way, and it just says, these are the attributes I'm going to keep, everything else goes away. So you don't need to know what you're getting rid of to get rid of it. And that's why the attribute keeper is kind of its own little beast, aside from like the attribute manager. It deals with the unknown attributes. I mean, it deals with the known ones as well, but it can deal with the unknown attributes. And that gives you a specific type of control over the feature. And it by eliminating all the attributes you don't know, it enforces a schema on the features that come out of it, making it ideal for bulk mode.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. So just one downside really of bulk mode is that bulk mode will, as it says, it usually will reorder your features. And I'll show you that kind of in here. And this is another way of going into bulk mode. Sorry, I missed this. Is when you have, say, something like the tester, and down at the advanced section you have here, it says preserve feature order. You have two options. One is per output port, and the other one is a cross output port. If you use per output port, basically you're keeping the order of the past and the order of the failed. So everything in the past will retain its original order, everything in the failed will retain its original order. But these will be put out in bulk mode of these tables of 100,000 features, and you don't control which of these tables goes first, right? So if you merge these two streams together, they will be now, the individual features may be out of their original order. If you have across output ports, now your features are going to be output individually and not in bulk mode, because you're preserving the order across all the ports. So to preserve the order, it may have to put out 1, 2, 3 out of the past, maybe 4 out of the failed, 5 out of the past, 6 out of the failed, etc. So it can't bulk mode. But they retain now, if those streams get merged together, they retain their original order. Now this, whether or not you care about the order, that's up to you. There's sometimes you want to retain the order. Most cases you don't. If you don't care about the order, you can use bulk mode. If you do care about the order, but you still want the improvement in performance, you can always try throwing a sorter at the end, and that will resort, and you still get the advantages of bulk mode. So I would say try one way or the other and see what works best for you.
Hey, Dave, I have a
Sure.
suggestion to encourage people to be always aware of the potential of performance improvement by using bulk. It perhaps some of the choices like the cross or the per output port could have maybe in parentheses identify this is bulk mode enabled or have something marked like that nature. Otherwise, it's hard for people to wrap their brain around it. Need to understand what's on the hood and knowing which one to choose, or they have to refer to a document, online help. So perhaps in the future, the implication of selecting certain attributes and have some hint available.
Yeah,
Just a suggestion.
it's a good suggestion. Yeah, I will pass that up. The only thing I can think that I might say is that we're essentially trying to, what one of Dale's slides said, the first rule of bulk mode is don't talk about bulk mode. But we don't want, this is something we don't want you to worry about. We want you to just sort of absorb the benefits without having to think about it. Like I'm showing you some, some tips here, but ultimately, when we're all said and done, we hope everything will be bulk mode. And then it will all just work for you. That's what we're really aiming for. But until then, we have docs on the bulk mode. And let's see if I can bring that up. Uh-oh, that's bad. Okay, hang on a sec. So let me just see if I can post this into the chat. So that's the linkage, and that's basically our documentation page on bulk mode. It's basically written down everything I've told you here, without some of the sideways conversations. But yeah, so that's pretty much it in, geez, where to go? This is a great time for this to happen.
Yep, my fault, Dave. Sorry.
Hang on. This makes me open my phone and get very upset. Oh, good, it didn't. Okay, so yeah, that basically brings me to the end of the presentation. Again, I'm open for any other questions that you might have. Okay then.
Well, I don't have any question, but I think it's since Matthew brought up the issue of attribute manager.
Yep.
And we had, you made a comments on those. I'm always debating myself whether or not I should use attribute manager. So one story or one side of me is saying, you need to really do separation of concerns. The beauty of FME oftentimes essentially make one thing available, kind of like Lego. You can build your own kind of like structures and how you want to deal with. Essentially, if we are doing renamer, just use renamer rather than using attribute manager only to do renamer. Because from memory footprint, I would think attribute renamer as a as a transformer will have much more efficient way versus using attribute manager, because attribute manager by its nature, it's a combination of so many other transformers combined together in terms of functionality, right? So one side of me is always debating how to leverage them. And I kind of still like old-fashioned a little bit and trying to just use individual transformers as opposed to use a amalgamation of larger ones, custom transform. I don't know how others feel about that, and whether or not you care, one way or the other. Certainly, there's presentation aspects. There's also efficiency aspects to worry about.
Yeah, I think it depends on how familiar you are with FME. I think if you're an old FME hand, you probably will not use the attribute manager because you already know the other transformers. They're simpler. They don't have as many options, and it's quicker to get things done. When your workspace runs, it doesn't matter which one you use. The same performance in both. I think the attribute manager is much more useful for people who are not as familiar with FME, who do not know the 500 odd transformers, and an attribute manager goes, oh, I want to do stuff with attributes. Oh, I can do it in the attribute manager in for the most part, yes, you can. So I think it's easier for the folks who are less used to FME. And yeah, again, if you're very used to FME, yeah, we'll throw in a creator, we'll throw in a remover. Heck, there's even a string concatenator, which I don't think anybody still uses, which basically it's duplicated in the attribute manager and is duplicated in the attribute creator. So we're probably remiss in having a little bit too much granularity, perhaps. And that's just from history, basically, right? So we guarantee backwards compatibility. So that means we do keep a lot of stuff that could probably be gotten rid of, just so that we can make sure we run the old workspaces, or work for the people who've been using it for 20 years and know what they like. So.
Yeah, Dave, I think when you say there's too much granularity, I think that's actually that can be a thing called too much. So if you go to one extreme, because I'm thinking, if you use like 5 transformers to do one attribute manager, okay, in that scenario, even though 5 individual, I think the memory footprint of 5 individual add up together, possibly would exceeding what one file manager would be. In addition, so there's a context switch. Every time you get into one transformer and leaving transformer 5 times versus only 1 time leaving and coming out, there's a cost associated with it as well, especially when you have the cache turned on, right? So because cache essentially saying for each output, I need to cache the value so we can interrogate. So in that case, so I'm always wondering which is more efficient from efficiency and balancing the efficiency versus the readability and maintainability. And I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, with cache, like you brought up caches, and that's a good point. Yeah, extra transformers, when you have caching turned on, means extra caches will result in slower performance. That said, when caches are turned off, each of these transformers is essentially a script. Now, an all-in-one transformer is going to have a larger script than a more granular transformer. So ultimately, the script size ends up about the same. And the sort of factories and functions that the scripts call remains the same. So with feature caching turned off, or when if you're running it from the pan line, or if you're running it within FME flow, performance will be about the same. So.
Okay, I hear you then. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions, I have another more kind of discussion, if you will. Because earlier I mentioned about bulk mode versus the transaction size versus individual mode, let's say.
Yep.
From database perspective, from RDBMS technology perspective, when we say we use bulk load, for example, in either PostgreSQL or Microsoft SQL Server, when you say use bulk copy or something to that nature, it really refers to going directly to the disk, knowing the offset of this chunk of data in its raw data format and bring that over. So it's really, really powerful and fast because going to the disk, how they stored in binary, then analyze it later afterwards, caught in one place. That was in that context. And when we say batch size or transaction size, I think is more or less equivalent. Essentially, group multiple records, let's say 1,000 at a time, to process versus processing one record at a time 1,000 times, right? So that's in a batch in the batch context. So I'm trying to relating bulk, or batch translation for this individual, looping through multiple times doing that. So I see this kind of three different levels, with bulk being the fastest, and combining some of the transformers and transaction into one to process being second, and certainly the third will be looping through individuals. I don't know if my perspective is on or not, but just throw out there for you to comment, for anyone to comment, for that matter.
Yeah, I can see the parallels there, although they're not. I would say that be careful that there's not a complete parallel there.
Okay.
And ultimately it comes down to bulk mode is something we do for us, in that it's FME is doing it to improve FME. We already have the sort of batch mode settings for the database readers and writers, and those are, I mean, there's some correlation between them, and I'm pretty sure that if your batch size hits the FME bulk, the 100,000, there might be some slight improvement, but ultimately, yeah, it's the interface between the readers and the writers, and the writers and the readers themselves are being tweaked and adjusted so that they can work with the bulk mode FME features. And that was the kind of the trick of it, is that we had to implement this in a manner that we could do some of the readers and writers, because FME is very modular. All of these readers and writers are their own little DLLs for the most part. And so they're all kind of talking to each other through this common API. So we had to set up this the API so that the readers that didn't handle bulk mode could still get bulk mode features, and it would be automatically dropped to individual for them. And any transformers that internally couldn't deal with bulk mode data would again have a sort of shims on either side of them so that they could deal with this data that came in bulk mode. So, I mean, that was kind of the key process, and that allowed us to make this a multi-version process, right? So, yeah, I guess that's the thing. It's that how well this corresponds to the actual database readers and writers depends on those individual readers and writers and what the developers have done with them. I think I wanted a bit of a field there, but
I have another thought.
sure.
Since bulk mode is mostly not truly exposed for most of the average developer to play with, kind of under the hood, I was wondering in the future there will be some tools can scan through your workspace saying, if you turn on this feature, you can leverage bulk mode and to improve performance. Essentially, like any tools can help us to identify places we can improve. Yeah, to leverage certain things we fail to manage as a hint or something. Because
Yeah.
otherwise it's kind of hidden,
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and it would be interesting. That would be something that would be could tie in with our AI initiatives. Like a lot of in 2024, a lot of our tools now have a little AI assistant built in. So if you want help writing SQL code, or you want help writing Python, we have a little AI assistant, or regular expressions, which I always have to look up. So that might be something that down the road for an AI to handle, to look through, especially since now that FME can read its own workspaces. Like there's a workspace reader in FME.
Right. Right.
So if you could get sort of a meta workspace there. On the other, I guess the other side of that is we are now, I think if you upgrade transformers, I will need to check this, but I think if you upgrade transformers, the new transformer will be put into the most optimum mode, which has upsides and downsides. Its upside is good for most people. Downside is for the few people who care about the order of the features that might that might cause an issue. That's a good question. I mean, I do a lot of workspaces where order is important, but that's the nature of the stuff I tend to work on. I'm just wondering, is there anyone else out there who cares about the order of their features? Or is it just my little bugaboo?
I know, Dave, sometimes with, our LRS data, um, really with just how we do our integration into Bentley's XOR. It's not spatial data. We remove the spatial aspect because we're just loading non-spatial data onto it. Um, and there are times, but it doesn't have too much of an effect of the order. And if we need to use a sorter to get it back to where we need, it's not going to have too much of an effect. We're not working with large data sets when we're doing this, maybe a couple thousand at most. But that's it for us.
Yeah, I think it's maybe because I deal a lot with sort of weird formats that aren't really read by FME, but can be read because they're all ASCII data. But a lot of it will be like structured column aligned text where a record might have 3 or 4 lines, which you have to insert order and you have to interpret each line. And I do a lot of that, and that may be prejudicing me in this case. But yeah, okay. It might
Yeah, I would interject on that. From a pure relational database perspective, the sequence is irrelevant. You're selecting a set operation. That makes the, SQL me being really, very much more SQL-oriented person for many, many years. And I see the forcing data into certain sequence itself is not very efficient. It's anti-set operation.
Okay, that makes sense. And yeah, we have cases where like you might have dependent tables, so you have to write the primary tables first and then the dependent tables afterwards. But we have a whole different mechanism to handle that on the writer's side. So yeah, maybe order just doesn't matter that much. In which case, bulk
Right.
mode for everybody.
Thank you, Dave. Great presentation. I learned a lot.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Happy to-
thank you, Dave.
You're welcome. Stop sharing.
All right, let's see. I will share screen. All right, well, thank you, Dave. For the wrap up, I know our next presentation will be Bo on May 15th, going over translation between multiple LRS in roads and highways. Once again, if you guys have any questions or comments regarding the presentations coming up or wanting to present, wanting to show off what any of you guys are doing, we'll be very excited, for any volunteers. So please just reach out to Bo, myself, and we can get you scheduled.